Hi, this is Aaron from Afternoons and Coffee Spoons, and today I'm going to be showing you how to assemble the XY joints on a Voron Trident. Alright, so let's get started with this portion of the build. What you're going to need is your left and right XY joints, and you're going to need the upper and lower parts. These are of course 3D printed in ABS so that they can withstand the appropriate temperatures in a Voron. What you're also going to need, hardware-wise, is 8 M5x40 screws, 6 M5 nuts, and in my case I am using 8 F695 bearings. Normally you would use 4 F695 bearings and 2 idlers, but in my case I have a lot of these bearings extra, and when assembled in a bearing stack similar to the other parts of the idler, you don't really need the GT2 toothed idler. You're also going to need 8 M5 washers. And last but not least, your screwdriver or Allen key of choice. It needs to be a 4mm hex head. Potentially, it could be not 4mm. Essentially, just what you want to do is check and make sure that you have an Allen key that fits your screws. Sometimes I've seen these where they have like a 3mm thing. They're out of spec. They have a different sized socket on them. So just double check, make sure that the Allen key that you have works with the screws that you have. So let's get started on the assembly process. So we're going to start with the left hand side first. You can tell it's left because it makes an L shape. And what we are going to do is insert 4 of these screws. Now if you're following the manual and me, you're going to jump ahead a little bit here. I am inserting this screw here, and that will be used for the bearing stack assembly. And let's just make sure that everything lines up here. You want to make sure that your recessed section there, or raised section, lines up with the one on here. That's going to be for registration and locking in your extrusions. So you can see everything works here. This popped out a little bit because this actually has a printed thread in the bottom here that we will tighten into later. You want to make sure that when you screw that in, when it comes time, you don't over tighten it. So let's just pull this apart and pop that right back up to where it was. And what I like to do is just make a note of which screws are going to need bearing stacks on them. These 2 screws are purely for assembly of this whole portion here, and these 2 are where you will have your bearings. So I put those towards myself just as a reminder. And for bearing stacks, you want to start with a washer first. I'm going to do both of these at the same time. So a washer on each of these, and then you want to take these bearings and put them flange down, and then another bearing on there, flange up, and that creates this little channel that you see there. I mentioned this in the last video, but in case you didn't see that, yeah. So that will allow the belt to stay in place, and you don't have to worry about the belt skipping. Now the next part, we're going to put the washers back on there, the rest of the washers I should say, and there we go. All right, now we are going to just pop this back together again, just make sure everything's nice. Yeah, everything looks like it should. What I am going to do before we get just putting these nuts in is I'm actually going to try and press fit them in. Now, depending on the calibration of your printer, you may have it fall in easily like that, or it may stick a little bit like this. So if it sticks, that's not a big issue. If you have a hard surface, in my case, I have a gauge block here, you can just set them upside down and apply a bit of force, and it'll pop in. Now, if it doesn't end up catching on the screw, another trick you can use, this I learned in my rep wrap days, is just feed a screw through. It's going to stick a little bit, and what we are going to do is use this screw almost as a lead screw and this nut as a lead nut. And as you can see, as I'm tightening this, it's pulling it down into the screw trap, or the nut trap, I should say. And there we go. I'll do the same on this. You'll have a little bit of resistance at the start, but assuming that your printer didn't over extrude, it should go in pretty quickly once you get past that threshold. And there we go. I like to pull it just a little bit tight. And now, oh, it popped out. Okay, now we can do this portion. So let me just line this up here. We are going to pop this guy on there. And what I like to do is, you don't want to flip this right upside down because it will just drop those nuts out of alignment. So I have just finger tightened, barely any force at all, this threaded screw. You want to make sure that you don't over tighten it, otherwise you will just strip that screw entirely. Now I am just tightening the other screws into those nuts. You want to make sure you don't over tighten this because it'll restrict the movement of these bearing stacks slash idlers. So there we go. And I'm just gonna go and do a quick little tighten, similar to when you're doing a heated bed or any sort of, adjustment. If you've ever changed a tire, you'll know that you don't just, follow in a circle. You want to go and adjust it. So in this case, we're just getting the tension applied evenly by going through, and there we go. We have our left side done. Now let's do the right side. Excuse the print quality here. There is a bit of debris that was on my PEI sheet. I need to get a new PEI sheet soon for my Voron Zero that I printed these on. If anyone has any recommendations of where to find a nice PEI sheet in Canada, like a flex plate, 120mm, please feel free to leave it in the comments. So we're just going to do the same thing here. And of course, again, this one is a printed thread in there for the screw. So we don't want to press it, but there we go. So yes, this orientation, it's going to be this screw and this screw that the bearings go on. So let's do that again. And again, we're doing washer on each. Then we are going to do bearing flange down, bearing flange up, washer, and now we are going to press fit these nuts. I don't know why I keep calling them bearings. And there we go. So I'm just going to see if I can get that in there. Another thing you can do, and I don't recommend this because you can damage the thread, but you can use another tool to pop them in there. And see, in this case, I just damaged the thread ever so slightly. It shouldn't do any long-term damage, but ideally you don't want to do that. So we can see that the registration section for where the extrusion will connect is right there. So the orientation is like this, and we are going to tighten in this one first, the threaded section, and don't go too tight, maybe a little tighter than that. There we go. There, that should be good. Yeah, moves nicely. Let's get these in there. Oop, don't want to lose these screws. lose the screws. All right, there's that. And I picked the length of these screws perfectly because, as you can see, it's almost flush, the tip of the screw and the nut. So there's just enough that it's on there and it's not going to move, but not too much that it's going to stick out and cause potential problems. So, all right. So my camera actually died right at the end there, but I did capture everything. So I figured, why reshoot if I can just, you know, take an otherwise perfect take. So that should pretty much cover assembling these. Obviously, at some point we are going to have to partially disassemble them to get the T-nuts in there, or potentially we could preload the T-nuts into the extrusion. And I'll show how to attach these to the linear rails, and we're going to complete a Trident build. So thank you for watching this video, and please stay tuned for more parts in this Trident build series.